Hey folks, sadly for you, I'm back. Urban terrain is my favorite type of terrain. There's something compelling about these cold industrial places where people live becoming a death trap of concrete and iron. Soldiers ducked behind the counter of a nail salon, grease-slicked alleys turning into deadly corridors, no surface spared from the military-industrial complex. In this video, I'll be defiling a sacred space in the urban world into a ground of carnage. Skate parks. You're watching Apollo Geist. So skate parks are always something I thought would be really cool as wargaming terrain. Thematically, I think it's interesting because skating is already a somewhat dangerous sport where you'll spill a bit of blood fast if you aren't careful. Obviously, it's not as dangerous as catching a bullet, but the idea of people just killing each other at a skate park is this weird, natural, logical conclusion. Don't ask me to elaborate. The other reason I think it'd be cool is simple. They create interesting geometry at the table with all the variable heights at play. I've sat on this for a while without too many plans to do it until recently at my routine trip to Ross. They had these Tech Deck skate park sets that I'd probably walked by 3 or 4 times in my previous visits and just didn't notice. These are modular sets that can be combined with each other for hypothetically infinite combinations. Pretty neat. I picked up 2 of these sets, one of these quarter pipes and the other a raised staircase. I opened them up and played around with them and was actually pretty hyped. These have very exaggerated dimensions, clearly intended for finger skateboards, but those same dimensions make them nice and playable with minis. These stair steps, for example, are a perfect fit for 28mm bases. So, knowing for sure now I was gonna do something with these, I ran up to a different Ross and picked up a 3rd set, this one including stairs and a quarter pipe at an even higher height. Altogether, I think I paid like $25 for all 3 sets, which for what I got out of these, by the end was well worth it. I wanted to buy even more, but I knew by this point that I was bordering on the excessive. I don't need an entire skate park table, just skate park pieces to mix in with the terrain. These are pretty cool toys, and the modularity does add a ton of play value. Sadly, I do need to do very specific things, so we're gonna glue most of these pieces together. But before we get to making physical modifications, there is something very important I have to do first.
Okay, yeah, I got that out of my system.
After dry fitting the pieces together and knowing how they worked, I set about to gluing these sets together permanently. I really wanted these pieces to be rock solid, so I bought this JB Weld epoxy formulated specifically for plastic. I squeezed some out of the epoxy and I was not a fan of this epoxy. I bought it hoping it would marry these plastic pieces together, but the beams used to build the skeleton are that kind of oily, rubbery plastic, you know the kind I'm talking about, and it just had a lot of trouble sticking. I suspect if I sanded the connection points it might have adhered better, but when I ran out of this I decided to just switch to super glue and baking soda for the rest, which worked better anyway.
Well, hi there, non-editing Apollo Geist. So basically what I want to go ahead and do here is I'm going to cover these sides up with some chipboard or styrene just to cover up kind of the skeleton, the scaffolding. It looks quite ugly. I don't like how it looks. Before I do that, I have to address these. So these are just peg holes that go all the way through, so you can sort of see through them if you look at a right angle. So initially I thought about just filling these in and just making them go away. The issue is, and I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but these have kind of a sort of coarse kind of concrete texture, which I really like. But the issue is if I just fill these in and then try to sand them over, you're still gonna notice these like X-shaped smooth points along the piece, and I just don't think that's gonna look very good. The more I thought on it, honestly, the more I kind of like these being here because it does add to sort of an industrial sort of look to it. I don't think concrete structures need beams going downwards like this. I could be wrong, I'm not an architect, but it looks cool. I think it'll be interesting. The issue is how to fill these in and look like beams. So the idea initially I had was to use these. These are the little connector pegs, and the idea I had was to sort of fill it in like this, you know, push it all the way up. The issue is you only have a few of these left over with each build when you're done, and cumulatively I only have about 6 left, which is like not even close to enough just for this piece alone. So what I think I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna go ahead and can go and basically go down each piece here and add a small little square of plastic card or chipboard or something, and just basically create a bracing underneath here. Then flipping it around here, I'm going to take some Milliput, I'm going to smush them into these holes, and then when they're in there, I'm going to take this and slick it with a bit of Vaseline so it doesn't stick, and then I'm going to push it into each hole, and it creates these little beams, or the illusion of beams running along these holes here in a way that looks kind of recessed and maybe looks intentional. I don't know. I want to do all of that first before doing this because this is going to make it harder to access these areas at a later time, but all right, let's go.
So to fill in those holes, I started by cutting up strips of cardstock and gluing them to the underside of the holes on every piece. This way they would serve as a sort of dam for the putty and ensure that it didn't get pushed through. After that, I mixed up some Milliput, smashed blobs of it into each hole, and used one of the Vaseline slick connector plugs as a stamp to create some inset looking metal bars. I could have used green stuff, which probably would have retained the shape better, but it would have taken longer to cure, and I actually have too much Milliput already, so I look for excuses to use it up when I can. The most transformative part of this whole project came from covering up these ugly exposed sides. I wanted them to still be able to butt up against each other while not looking painfully obvious they were once toys intended for something else. I settled on matboard. This is the stuff used to create the matting on photos and is, from what I can tell, just chipboard with smooth paper surfaces on both sides. I want to confess something, mainly because it's something you'll see in later videos. I don't know how to read a ruler. Like, I know inches, right? And I know half inches, but throughout my life, I've never really needed to, measure things in ways that require learning fractional increments. I mention this here because my way of cutting out the walls is perhaps a little inelegant. I'm pressing the pieces to the mat board and simply tracing them. Consequently, I had to do a lot of last-minute corrections even after cutting and gluing. Another reason I want to talk about this is you shouldn't let these shortcomings stop you from making things. I've been trying to learn to figure out rulers when I can, but I will always be atrocious with numbers, and I'm not going to let that impede me. Anyway, after cutting these pieces out, I decided to give epoxy another try, this time with the standard stuff. This process was a little fiddly, but mostly went fine until I got arrogant and didn't mix up my epoxy enough like I should have. I had to peel these off, scrape away the bad epoxy, and try again before I got things right. With the epoxy cured, I whipped up my Dremel and added some light battle damage, emphasis on light. I want these to be reusable for more than just Warhammer or Infinity, and if I make them too busted looking, then I can't use them for role-playing games where I just need a regular-ass skate park. On the mat board, I found myself having to soak the areas I wanted to bore into with super glue, otherwise it was just a fibrous mess. Wear a mask when you do stuff like this, by the way. I sanded everything down to remove any stray burrs or fibers, and then it was time for the part I look forward to the most: painting this concrete bullshit. A while back, I built this beautiful MDF kit from Brutal Cities, which you may have seen in a few videos. While I'm very happy with how it turned out, I've come to lament how cold and blue the concrete on the top floor turned out. Most concrete doesn't look like this, so for those pieces, I wanted them to be my concrete redemption story. Before that, I primed the pieces and immediately realized I'd fucked up a little. So matboard has this smooth paper finish to it, but when I sanded it earlier, I created a fibrous surface texture that was flaking off like crazy. No biggie, I took some Mod Podge and used it to stabilize the texture. This actually created a more interesting texture to the surface than if I hadn't sanded it. Something, happy accidents. The name of the game for this terrain is sponge painting. I use this technique for most of my terrain. It's fast, easy, and creates a nice built-in texture. I bought this huge artist sponge for this purpose and base coated with a warm gray craft paint. For most of the surface, I didn't even bother thinning it. The applied pressure of the sponge distributes the paint thinly, and I don't really have to worry about filling in fine detail. It was thankfully really fast, but required lots of arm swinging. This was for sure the second most vigorous thing my right arm did that night. I did use smaller pluck foam with slightly thinned gray on the stripes, corners, and areas the Uber sponge couldn't reach, creating a more subtle transition to black. With that dry, I switched to a cream color to apply highlights. I kept this simple, using it to go over the edges and areas light would hit most. To create a more organic look, I took a page out of Small World Workshop's concrete painting tutorial and thinned down black and white paint respectively, then spattering them using a toothbrush. This was messy and resulted in lots of oversized splotches, but any stray spots ended up just looking like weathering anyway. Then I cleaned up the mess I created, mere hours after I was at Home Depot and decided against buying some paper to cover my workspace, thinking I wasn't going to need it because I'm an overgrown toddler. Then I painted in the metal bits, which I should have waited on because I had to go over them again anyway after the following step. So as much as I love concrete, I thought these were looking a little plain and wanted some splashes of color. To that end, I masked off some areas and painted them in. For the tallest piece, I created a stencil by cutting out an arrow, then realized I could use the negative for the arrow on the top of that piece. Otherwise, I just painted assorted bits like the rails or lips on the quarter pipes. I created some chipping for the pieces using sponging, using gray on the concrete, and then a combination of dark brown and silver on the metal pieces to create the illusion of rust. I was getting really excited about these pieces, so I started peeling the masking tape off really fast like and I'm okay. I applied some Vallejo airbrush primer over the area, and with some sponging, you could barely tell anything happened. I would be a bit more worried if this wasn't an area where lots of minis are going to be standing and applying friction, but it's not, so whatever. With the primary painting done, it was almost time to start the weathering, but first, we gotta solely skateboarding with capitalism. One thing you guys need to understand about me, I love covering terrain with posters and ads. To me, posters are to terrain what washes are to a mini. It instantly adds verisimilitude. It makes the pieces look like a world you could live in with a story. It also allows me to shamelessly inject my other niche interests into the hobby. For these pieces, I printed up some pretty big posters to glue onto the sides. I took some of these from sources somewhat relevant to the project. From Sonic Adventure 2, I printed this Soap Shoes advert and a movie poster for Chow in Space 2. From Jet Set Radio, I printed these music advertisements. Lastly, I wanted there to be some despotic corporations buying ad space at this park, so I designed my own posters for Anaheim Electronics from Gundam and Smart Brain from Kamen Rider Faiz. I printed these at high DPI, but for the Jet Set and Sonic posters, these are textures from old video games, so they're simply going to be a little blurry. They just are. That's okay. I'm going to be grinding these up anyway, and we'll be looking at them from a distance. You may also notice I printed doubles of these at different sizes. Well, remember how I said I was trying to learn to use a ruler like an adult? Well, I tried that here and measured the pieces to print at those dims, but I had a feeling I was going to fuck it up, so I printed extras at a bigger size in case I measured wrong, and wouldn't you believe it, I measured too small. I ask for everyone's patience at this time. I'm a work in progress, listening and learning. I wanted to test something for fun. When I was in Tampa with a friend last month, I copped this from the local Daiso. This is Arabic Bond glue, a glue that seems to be mainly used for stationery and scrapbooking, but I wanted to play around with it here. The glue is silky smooth and even comes with a double-sided applicator. I applied one of the posters using it and was really impressed with how well it let me glide it around until I noticed it softened the paper and started to cause wrinkling. I frantically unwrinkled and just left it alone. This is a cool glue and I'll probably be using it for later stuff, just maybe not a good idea to be demoing this right now. I went back to Mod Podge for the rest, applying at least one poster for each piece, trying to pick posters that didn't clash with the accent colors. Otherwise, it was time for the final step, weathering. So an important thing to remember about concrete, it's never uniformly just one color. Batches are mixed at slightly different ratios, and finished concrete is subject to the rigors of rain, bird shit, mildew, spilled smoothies, and so on. I want to convey this on these pieces, so I returned to oil paint. Using a myriad of colors, I applied dots all over each piece, trying to avoid any kind of pattern or consistency here. Then I took a brush soaked with thinner and streaked downward, trying to create the illusion of staining affected by gravity. I definitely went a bit overboard here. There was simply too much for the brush to streak away on its own, so I had to rely on a paper towel to pick up the slack. I also think including a bright red was a mistake. The palette of oil is already skewed warm enough, and the pink stains left over looked the least natural. I think I also should have applied some matte varnish to the posters first. The glossy finish of the Mod Podge caused the oils to break apart a little and didn't stain as much as I'd wanted. I learned this technique from 52 Miniatures, but this technique almost feels like the inverse of the Max Watanabe technique from the Plamo world, which relies on similar principles. I'll probably be making a video on that sometime in the future. There's still a lot of bare concrete, and I considered applying some graffiti, but I think we'll come back to that at another time. I'm happy enough with these pieces and ready to move on. Let's roll the money shot.
End result.
These might be my favorite terrain pieces I have ever done, especially in terms of effort to payoff. They aren't perfect. I know some of you are screaming that the curved ramps are basically unusable, but I think you guys are gonna live. This has inspired me to start cracking away on more urban terrain. What kind of stuff do you want to see next? Let me know, or tell me how I'm stealing skater valor in the comments. Peace.